As President-elect Joe Biden assembles his transition team, President Trump refuses to concede the election. In fact, he reportedly plans to hold campaign-style rallies in the coming days where he's going to highlight specific examples of alleged voter fraud, including obituaries of people who supposedly voted in the election despite being deceased. Joining me now is President Trump's former White House press secretary, Sean Spicer. He is also the author of the book, Leading America, President Trump's Commitment to People, Patriotism, and Capitalism. Sean, always good to see you. What do you make of the president's legal challenges to this election? And is he right not to concede right now?
Well, look, in the year 2000, we waited 37 days while votes were recounted and tabulated in Florida. And I think we've got a system in place where candidates have the ability to ask for recounts, and we get to go through the system and make sure that it was done correctly. The president, look, this election was close. You look at the number of states, the president has a right and frankly, you know, if you think about it, 70 million people went out and voted for him. I feel like to some degree we got to remember that he has almost an obligation to those people to say, you went out, you voted for me. In many cases, you donated, you gave your time or your money, you volunteered, and to show that, you know, he wants to make sure all their votes were honored. He has a right to go through this process. We've done it before. And I think, you know, at the end of the process, we have until December 14th before electors meet in their various state capitals. So there really isn't a rush, and there's a precedent for it.
And you're right. It was a close election. I think that's getting lost in the sauce. I mean, Trump received the second highest popular vote total in history behind Biden. He obviously is resonating with his core supporters, but also with the greater Republican Party. If Trump were to run again in 2024, and there's already talk amongst his advisors reportedly that he has said he wants to, he'll be 78 then. Would he be a formidable candidate, do you think?
He'll be Joe Biden's age. Yeah, you know, yeah, of course he would. Look, I've never seen a candidate in either party have such control of the base as he does. So, you know, if that were to be the case, there's no question that he would be a force to be reckoned with, whether as a kingmaker or as a candidate himself. That would definitely be the case. But, you know, it was interesting. I saw a tweet from Ari Fleischer, a predecessor of mine as White House press secretary, who just said, you know, and I think it actually made a lot of sense, which is this is an opportunity to look at some of these states and how they cast ballots as the president and his legal team goes through this. And maybe we find that there are flaws in the system. Maybe we find that you know, you mentioned at the intro, if people who truly are dead are voting, that's a problem. And frankly, you know, no matter who you voted for, every vote that's improperly cast offsets one that is properly cast. And so all of us as voters and as citizens should be concerned about any level of voter fraud, of voter, you know, of improper votes being cast. And so the beauty of this process right now is that it's not just about President Trump, but I think it's healthy and good for these states individually to go through and look at, were there, you know, things that happened in between. There's an affidavit that the Trump campaign has put out from Michigan saying that someone was forced to backdate ballot applications. And if that's the case, that's a big problem as well. But we need to make sure that the integrity of our system is strong. And so this process serves more than one purpose.
You know, earlier today, former Vice President Joe Biden, now President-elect Biden, did address the nation from Delaware. I want you to listen to what he had to say and then get your reaction.
We're still facing a very dark winter. There are now nearly 10 million COVID cases in the United States. And last week, we topped 120,000 new cases on multiple successive days. Infection rates are going up, hospitalizations are going up, deaths are going up.
We wouldn't be where we are right now, I don't think, if President Trump and Operation Warp Speed. I understand Pfizer operated outside of it, but the reality was that this government was clearing bureaucratic hurdles for these companies to actually get a vaccine to market sooner rather than later. And we've done this now in record time. The president's made very clear that he has a plan to distribute that using the military logistical system once it's finally approved. I think, look, what we've learned, frankly, over the last couple of months, I think, is that when given the proper leadership, the government can act much more efficiently and effectively than it usually does. And we've seen that happen now. So I think a lot of credit goes to President Trump for allowing this process to work its will the way it has.
I want to switch to trade for a moment, because President Trump really liked to use tariffs as sort of the centerpiece of his trade relations. What do you think a Biden presidency will mean for trade, especially when it comes to our relationship with China?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think that President Trump, not just China, but I mean, look at what he did with NAFTA, now USMCA. This president came in. I spent 3 years doing trade work for the Bush administration. What this president did was come in and not accept the status quo, not accept that because a trade agreement was enforced that you couldn't actually renegotiate it for a better deal for Americans, American workers. I think with China, that's going to be a good question. This president has been tough on China. And so I think that there's a lot of questions about the relationship that Joe Biden has with China. And, you know, will he be as tough? But I also think that it's hypothetical to start talking about what he'll do until we do a disservice to the process, until we know when those electors meet on December 14th, you know, who, in fact, they are casting their votes for.
When you look back at the past now almost 4 years and the way President Trump has been dealing with these election results, what do you think his legacy is going to be, Sean?
Well, I mean, I think there's going to be several. First of all, I think what he has done on the federal judiciary as a conservative is just something that you don't ever think you're going to see in your lifetime. 230 plus federal judges, 3 Supreme Court justices. That's huge. But then I think you look at areas like trade, and this president has changed the trajectory of you know, there is this sentiment in Washington, D.C. That, you know, the Republican Party was just a free trade, full stop party. The president has really reshaped that to make it more of a, you know, trade with conditions and trade as long as it benefits America. And I think you've seen him really redefine what the number one goal is. I mean, you can't. There's always been this appeasement strategy with China that if we just engage with them more and differently, somehow it's going to change. I think this president recognizes for the first time in several administrations that they're not looking to change. They have a pretty stated goal in terms of global dominance, and that our job is to stand up for our people, our workers, and not necessarily try to figure out how to get along with them.
You know, I think you hit on something there. I mean, in many ways, Trump has sort of changed the DNA of the Republican Party. You know, whether he runs or not in another 4 years, what is sort of the biggest way he's changed the GOP, to your mind?
Well, I think there's definitely a more populist flair to it. There's no question the Republican Party is the party of working men and women. And that was sort of something that maybe 10 years ago, maybe less, that was sort of the mantra of the Democratic Party. I think now working men and women, especially people who are small business owners and, you know, working 1 or 2 jobs at an hourly wage are more and more becoming Republican.
What about let's say he doesn't run in 4 years? Is there anybody that you think is waiting in the wings? I know there are, or who should be waiting in the wings as the next star of this party? Who do you see as a formidable candidate if it's not Trump in 2024?
Yeah, again, if it's not him, you know, my guess is I ran the debate process for the party last cycle. We had 18, 19 candidates. My guess is that you end up seeing 30 plus candidates run for the Republican nomination. You've got people that have served under this president, everyone from Nikki Haley to Mike Pompeo to Mike Pence. You've got a lot of senators that have talked about openly running and some governors as well. Then you've got even the president's son, Don Jr., being mentioned as a potential candidate. So I don't think, first of all, I think we're 4 years away from that issue coming into play. And I think that a lot happens then. You've seen candidates try to position themselves way early, and it generally doesn't work. You find that a lot of times a candidate will take off and then, you know, kind of overperform and way too early. So I think we've got a long ways to go, but I would expect a very robust field.
If you had President Trump in a room for 5 minutes right now, if you had his ear right now, what would you tell him?
Well, I'd congratulate him on a job well done. It's the second most amount of votes that any candidate in history has ever gotten. And I think that, you know, if specifically from where he is right now, I'd say the more that he can lay out a very clear and coherent case as to what the issues are. For example, in Pennsylvania, Justice Alito ruled or had an order come out. He asked for the Democrats to respond yesterday about this issue of votes that came in and were tallied after Election Day. That change was made by the state court, and the Constitution is clear that changes need to be made by the state legislature, which wasn't the case. If the Supreme Court ends up ruling in favor of the Trump campaign in this case, that's a big deal. That changes Pennsylvania big. And I think the campaign and the president should go out and explain how much is at stake and what would change things. Because if you take 20 votes away from electoral votes away from Biden, put 20 in President Trump's column in that one state, that starts to get this thing real tight real quick.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Again, the name of the book is Leading America. Sean Spicer, former White House press secretary. Always good to see you.
Good to see you, Alexis. Thank you.